Once upon a time, in the village of Aho, beauty was something everyone noticed, and no one was more beautiful than Shaka. Her skin was smooth and dark, like rich earth, her eyes shone like stars, and her smile could melt even the coldest heart. She was the pride of the village, and everyone talked about her beauty. Women admired her, though many were secretly jealous, while men couldn't help but turn their heads whenever she passed by. Shaka was married to Oba, a strong and proud man who loved her deeply but had a dangerous flaw: his jealousy. While Oba was proud to have such a beautiful wife, he couldn't stand the way other men looked at her. His heart burned with jealousy every time he saw someone admire her. Instead of feeling blessed, he began to feel cursed. Oba's jealousy only grew worse with time. He often asked Shaka about the men she spoke to, accusing her of flirting even when she was only being polite. Shaka, who loved Oba and was always faithful to him, tried to reassure him, but nothing seemed to ease his mind. The more Oba questioned her, the more frustrated Shaka became. She knew she had done nothing wrong, and she was tired of defending herself. One day, a group of women in the village, who had always been jealous of Shaka, decided to spread a cruel rumor. They started whispering that Shaka was not as faithful as she seemed. They said she was meeting other men in secret, and that her beauty was a tool she used to deceive everyone. The rumor spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the village. When Oba heard the rumors, his jealousy turned into rage. He didn't ask Shaka if the rumors were true. He simply assumed the worst. That night, when Shaka came home, Oba confronted her. His eyes were filled with anger as he repeated the horrible things he had heard. Shaka, shocked and hurt by the false accusations, tried to defend herself, insisting she was innocent. But Oba, blinded by his jealousy, refused to listen. The argument grew heated, and in his rage, Oba did something unforgivable. He grabbed a knife and, without thinking, slashed Shaka's mouth. Shaka screamed in pain as blood poured from the wound. Her once beautiful face was now scarred, her smile forever changed. Oba, realizing what he had done, stepped back in horror, but it was too late. The damage was done. The next morning, news of the attack spread through the village. Many of the women who had been jealous of Shaka were secretly pleased. They felt that Shaka, with her beauty, had finally been brought down to their level. Even some of the men who had always admired her felt a twisted sense of satisfaction, as their own wives were now more beautiful in comparison. But for Shaka, the pain was unbearable. Not just the physical pain, but the heartbreak of being betrayed by the man she loved. She had always been faithful, and now, because of lies and jealousy, her life was shattered. She could feel the stares and hear the whispers whenever she walked through the village. People no longer looked at her with admiration, but with pity or cruel satisfaction. Shaka's once beautiful life had been turned upside down. The woman who had been the pride of Aho was now a broken, scarred figure. But deep inside, where the pain and betrayal festered, something else began to grow: a dark, burning desire for revenge. Shaka knew she couldn't stay in the village where everyone had turned against her. She needed to leave, to find a way to regain her power and make those who wronged her pay. The villagers, instead of showing pity, were secretly pleased with her downfall. The women who had long been jealous of Shaka's beauty now felt a twisted satisfaction seeing her face marred by Oba's rage. The men, who had once admired her, now no longer saw her as a threat to their own relationships. Shaka's life in Aho became unbearable. Everywhere she went, she felt the sting of laughter and the weight of judgmental eyes. People no longer greeted her with warmth. Instead, they whispered behind her back, making cruel jokes about her disfigured face. The village that once celebrated her beauty now took pleasure in her suffering. Shaka could no longer bear the pain and humiliation. She knew she couldn't stay in Aho, where everyone had turned against her. She decided to leave the village and seek out the one person who might help her: the old witch who lived deep in the dark forest. The villagers spoke of the witch in fearful tones, remembering the terrible magic she once wielded. Banished long ago for her dark practices, the witch lived in isolation, far from prying eyes. One night, under the cover of darkness, Shaka made her way into the forest. The journey was long and difficult, but Shaka was driven by a powerful desire for revenge. She was determined to find the witch and gain the power she needed to make those who had wronged her pay dearly. After hours of walking through the dense forest, Shaka finally arrived at a small crooked hut hidden among the trees. The air was thick with the smell of herbs and smoke, and the sounds of the forest seemed to hush as she approached. The door to the hut creaked open, and Shaka stepped inside. Inside the hut, the old witch sat by a fire, stirring a pot filled with strange ingredients. Her eyes were sharp and knowing, and she looked at Shaka with a piercing gaze. The witch had been expecting her. "I see your pain," the witch said, her voice low and raspy. "You seek revenge, don't you?" Shaka nodded, her heart filled with anger and determination. "I want the power to make them suffer, to take back what they stole from me," she replied. The witch smiled, her teeth yellowed and crooked. "Revenge comes with a price," she warned. "Are you willing to pay it?" Shaka didn't hesitate. She had nothing left to lose. "I am," she said firmly. The witch stood and began to prepare a potion, mixing herbs and whispering ancient spells. The air in the hut grew heavy with magic, and Shaka could feel a strange energy building around her. The witch handed Shaka a cup filled with a dark, bubbling liquid. "Drink this, and you will gain the power you desire," the witch said. "But remember, once you take this path, there is no turning back." Without a second thought, Shaka drank the potion. As the liquid flowed down her throat, she felt a surge of energy and a burning sensation in her veins. Her scars tingled, and her anger seemed to solidify into something powerful and dark. The witch watched with satisfaction as Shaka's eyes grew cold and her spirit transformed. "You now have the power to command the creatures of the earth," the witch said. "Use them wisely, and those who have wronged you will fall before you." Shaka left the witch's hut, feeling stronger than ever. She had the power she needed to take her revenge. Returning to Aho, she was no longer the broken woman who had left. She was something far more dangerous. The villagers went about their lives, unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon them. One morning, as Oba worked in the fields, he heard a rustling in the grass. Before he could react, a large, venomous snake slithered out from the shadows, its eyes fixed on him. The snake struck quickly, biting Oba's leg with deadly precision. The poison spread through his body like fire. Oba fell to the ground, his strength fading fast. As he lay dying, he realized that this was no ordinary snake. It was a creature sent by Shaka, controlled by the dark power she had gained from the witch. In his final moments, Oba understood the terrible price of his jealousy and rage. With Oba dead, Shaka had taken her first step on the path of vengeance. But she was not done. The village that had once celebrated her beauty would soon know the full extent of her wrath. With Oba dead, Shaka had only begun her revenge. The village of Ajo, where she once lived in harmony, was now her enemy. The people who once admired her beauty had betrayed her, and she would make them pay. After killing Oba, Shaka did not stop. Her heart was filled with darkness, and she was determined to bring suffering to everyone who had celebrated her downfall. The villagers were unaware of what had happened to Oba. They assumed he had been bitten by a snake while working in the fields, a tragedy that was not uncommon. But Shaka knew better. The snake had been sent by her command, and it was only the beginning. As the days passed, strange things began to happen in the village. Cattle that had been healthy the day before were found dead in their pens, their bodies twisted and swollen. Crops that had been growing strong suddenly withered and died. The villagers whispered among themselves, wondering what could be causing these misfortunes, but no one suspected Shaka. Shaka, now living on the outskirts of the village, watched with satisfaction as fear began to spread. Her power grew stronger with each passing day, and she used it to bring more suffering to the people of Aho. She knew their happiness was built on her pain, and she was determined to tear it all down. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a young mother in the village gave birth to a baby boy. The village should have celebrated the birth of a new child, but instead a deep sense of dread hung in the air. The child was beautiful, with bright eyes and a strong cry. But that night, as the mother slept with her baby in her arms, the child was taken from her. Shaka had been waiting for this moment. Using her newfound powers, she sent a dark shadow into the mother's home. The shadow moved silently, slipping into the room where the mother and baby slept. In the darkness, the baby's cries were silenced as the shadow took him away. The next morning, the mother woke up to find her child gone. She screamed in terror, waking the entire village. The villagers rushed to her home, but there was no sign of the baby. Panic spread quickly, and soon everyone was on edge, fearing for their own children. The villagers searched high and low, but the baby was nowhere to be found. Days passed, and the hope of finding the child alive faded. Fear gripped the village as more babies began to disappear in the night. Shaka had unleashed her curse upon Ajo, and the villagers were powerless to stop it. With each child she took, Shaka grew stronger. The villagers who once celebrated the birth of every new child now dreaded it. No one knew who was taking the babies or where they were going. But whispers of dark magic began to spread. Some began to suspect that the village was cursed, though none dared to speak Shaka's name. Shaka's revenge was nearly complete, but she was not yet satisfied. She wanted the villagers to suffer as she had suffered. She wanted them to feel the loss and pain that she had felt when Oba turned against her. She knew that taking their children was the worst punishment she could give. For the loss of a child is the deepest sorrow a parent can bear. The village of Ajo, once filled with joy and laughter, was now a place of fear and mourning. The people lived in constant dread, wondering who would lose their child next. They prayed to the gods for mercy, but their prayers went unanswered. As Shaka continued her campaign of terror, she began to steal something else from the villagers: the beauty of their women. Using her dark powers, she took the youth and beauty from every woman in the village, leaving them old and haggard overnight. The women's skin became wrinkled, their hair turned grey, and their strength faded. They could not understand what was happening to them, but Shaka knew. She was taking back what they had stolen from her, the admiration and attention that had once been hers. The village of Aho was now a place of fear and sorrow. Children disappeared in the night, and the women's beauty faded away as if stolen by a dark wind. Shaka had unleashed her revenge on the people who had once mocked her, and she was far from finished. Every night, Shaka would stand at the edge of the village, watching as darkness fell. She could feel her powers growing stronger. The more the villagers suffered, the more her anger fueled her magic. She no longer felt the pain of her scars. Instead, she felt powerful, almost invincible. As the days went by, the villagers began to grow desperate. They tried everything to protect their children, locking their doors, keeping their babies close, and even praying to the gods. But nothing worked. Each time a child was born, Shaka's shadow would come in the night and take the baby away. The mothers would wake to find their arms empty, their hearts broken. The villagers were terrified, and they began to turn on each other. Some accused their neighbors of witchcraft, believing that someone among them was responsible for the curse. Others thought the gods were punishing them for some unknown sin. But no one knew the truth, that it was Shaka, the woman they had all betrayed, who was behind their suffering. But something strange began to happen. Despite her ugly scars, the men in the village started to feel an unnatural attraction to Shaka. It was as if her power over them grew stronger with every day that passed. They would find themselves drawn to the edge of the village where she lived, unable to resist her dark pull. Even though they knew it was wrong, they couldn't stay away. Shaka noticed this change and realized that her powers had grown in ways she hadn't expected. The men who had once admired her beauty from afar now came to her willingly, even though she was no longer the woman they once knew. This new power gave Shaka even more control over the village, as the men began to forget about their own wives, drawn only to her. The village elders, who had once been respected leaders, were now powerless to stop what was happening. They had no answers for the terrified villagers, and they themselves were too afraid to confront the dark force that had taken hold of their home. The village that had once been full of life and laughter was now silent, filled only with the sound of mourning and fear. Shaka's revenge had reached every corner of Aho. The people were broken, their spirits crushed under the weight of her curse. But Shaka was not yet satisfied. She still remembered the day when Oba had scarred her, the pain of his betrayal still fresh in her mind. And she remembered the villagers who had laughed and whispered behind her back, who had been happy to see her fall. Shaka knew that there was one more thing she needed to do to complete her revenge. She needed to destroy the village itself, to wipe Aho off the map so that no one would ever speak of it again. The thought filled her with a cold satisfaction, and she began to plan her final act of vengeance. As Shaka's power over the village grew, She became more confident and bold in her actions. She decided to move even closer to the villagers she despised, hiding her true intentions behind a mask of generosity. Shaka set up a stall in the village market, selling fresh meat to the people of Aho. The villagers, who were struggling with hunger and fear, were drawn to her stall as if by an invisible force. The meat she sold was unlike anything they had tasted before, tender, juicy, and full of flavor. The villagers were so charmed by the quality of the meat that they flocked to her stall every day, eager to buy from her. No one questioned where the meat came from, even though there was little game left in the nearby forests. All they knew was that Shaka had what they needed, and they couldn't resist her. But the truth behind Shaka's meat was darker than anyone could imagine. Each night, after the market closed and the villagers returned to their homes, Shaka would choose her next victim. She would wait until they were alone, slipping through the shadows with her magic. Then she would strike, using her powers to kill them quickly and quietly. The victim would vanish without a trace, and by morning their flesh would be neatly prepared and ready to sell in the market. Shaka took a twisted pleasure in knowing that the very people who had wronged her were unknowingly consuming the flesh of their friends and neighbors. It was her final act of revenge, a way to taint their souls just as they had tainted hers. And under the spell of her dark magic, the villagers were none the wiser. They ate greedily, praising Shaka for her generosity, never realizing that they were feasting on the dead. As the days passed, the missing villagers became a topic of conversation. People whispered about the disappearances, wondering if the curse on their village had grown worse. But whenever someone tried to investigate, Shaka's influence over them would cloud their minds. They would forget their suspicions and instead find themselves back at her stall, buying more meat. The village elders, who were supposed to protect the people, were also caught in Shaka's web. They, too, were drawn to her stall, unable to resist the allure of the meat she sold. Shaka's magic had twisted their minds, making them blind to the truth. They would eat the meat with no thought of the lives that had been taken to provide it. Shaka's power over Ajo was now complete. The villagers, once proud and strong, were reduced to desperate, hungry souls, controlled by the very woman they had betrayed. Each time they bought her meat, they unknowingly sealed their fate, becoming part of the cycle of death that Shaka had created. Shaka stood at the center of it all, watching with cold satisfaction as her revenge played out exactly as she had planned. She was the butcher of Aho, and the village's fate was in her hands. Yet even as Shaka's power grew, a part of her began to feel the weight of what she had done. The darkness that had fueled her revenge was now consuming her as well, and she knew that the time would soon come when her own magic would demand a price she might not be willing to pay. But for now, Shaka was content to watch the villagers fall deeper into her trap, unaware of the true horror that lay behind the smiles and the friendly greetings at the market. They were all part of her final twisted game, and Shaka was determined to see it through to the very end. Shaka's power over the village of Aho had seemed unstoppable. She had taken her revenge, turning the villagers into her puppets, making them suffer in ways they never imagined. But deep down, Shaka knew that her dark magic could not last forever. She had become reckless, believing she was invincible, but her magic had its limits. One day, Shaka made a grave mistake. In her hunger for even more power, she tried to cast a spell that would make her control over the villagers permanent. She wanted to make sure that no one could ever defy her, that her reign of terror would never end. But as she performed the ritual, something went wrong. The spell backfired, and in an instant Shaka felt her power begin to slip away. The villagers, who had been under her spell for so long, suddenly began to wake up. Their minds cleared, and they remembered everything: the missing people, the strange meat, and the terror that had gripped their lives. Anger and fear filled their hearts as they realized that Shaka had been behind it all. The charm that had kept them blind to her actions was gone, and the villagers were ready to take their revenge. Shaka, feeling her power fading, knew she was in danger. Desperate, she ran to the old woman in the forest, the witch who had given her these dark powers in the first place. But when Shaka arrived at the old woman's hut, she found only silence. The old woman was dead, her body cold and lifeless. Without her, there was no one to restore Shaka's magic, no one to help her now. Disappointed and scared, Shaka returned to her home at the edge of the village. She could feel the anger of the villagers growing, and she knew they would come for her soon. Just as she was trying to think of a way to escape, a villager came to her door. He was one of the few who had not been charmed by her magic. His face was grim as he warned her that the villagers were gathering with torches and weapons, ready to hunt her down. "They're coming for you, Shaka," the man said. "You need to run, now." Panic gripped Shaka's heart. She grabbed a few things and fled her home, running as fast as she could. She didn't know where she was going. She just wanted to get away before the villagers found her. But as she ran, she kept looking over her shoulder, terrified that they were right behind her. In her fear, Shaka didn't see the small, deep river ahead of her. The water was dark and fast, hidden by the thick trees around it. She stumbled, trying to keep her balance, but it was too late. Shaka slipped and fell into the river, the cold water pulling her under before she could scream for help. The river was strong, and Shaka couldn't fight it. The water dragged her down, and within moments she was gone, swallowed by the depths. Her life ended just as quickly as her power had faded, leaving nothing behind but the dark memories of the village she had once controlled. When the villagers arrived at Shaka's home, they found it empty. The woman who had caused so much pain was gone, her hold on them broken. There was relief, but also sadness and anger for all they had lost. The village of Aho slowly began to heal, but the scars of Shaka's curse would never fully fade. Dear viewers, what lessons did you take away from this dramatic tale? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with friends, and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest updates. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.